They do not sing songs about him, not in the market squares, not in the candle-lit halls, not even in the quiet rooms where old men drink and remember things they were never meant to remember. His name does not appear in the official chronicles, and if you were to ask the royal archivists, they would look at you with polite confusion and turn the page. And yet, he lived, and he died, and for a time he was closer to the crown than anyone else. This is the story of the prince who never was. He was born on a night when the bells did not ring. That alone should have been a warning. I mean, a terrible sign. A girl child the king desperately needed. Alliance, he says often. Too many boys, but none to fill the gap a girl child could fill. Storm clouds hung low over the capital, swallowing the moon, pressing the sky down as if the world itself were holding its breath. In the eastern tower of the palace, behind stone walls, thick enough to muffle both thunder and truth, a child was born to Queen Althea, first wife of King Aldrin III. No trumpets announced his arrival. No banners were raised. No messengers were sent galloping through the streets. He had scales that divided his face. One side looks dead, and the other was alive. The midwives exchanged glances. The court physician cleared his throat. And when the baby cried, strong, defiant, alive, the sound seemed almost out of place. A son, someone said quietly. A son that is more dead nor alive, they mumbled. The king arrived an hour later. He looked down with disdain. There were no smile found in his face, not a sign that showed his wife just put to birth. He looked at the child as one might look at an unscheduled storm, something inconvenient, something that complicated plans already made. "We already have an heir," King Aldrin said at last. "But not this." And just like that, the boy's fate was sealed. The child was named Aurelian. Officially, he was called nothing at all. He was not presented to the court as a prince. His cradle bore no crest. His nursemaids were loyal but carefully chosen, women who spoke little and remembered less. He was raised in the lesser wing of the palace, where tapestries were faded and the windows faced the inner walls rather than the city. Aurelian grew up watching shadows move across stone. He learned early that he was different. Hence the reason he was kept a secret from everyone, including his family. Other children, his half-brothers, trained in the yard with swords crafted for ceremony as much as combat. They wore silk and gold and spoke of futures already written for them. Aurelian trained alone, in the confinement of his chambers, with wooden blades, with borrowed books, with questions no one wanted to answer. "Why don't I dine with father?" he asked once. His tutor hesitated, then smiled thinly. "Kings are busy men." As he looked aside, buried the smirk of his face. "Why don't they call me prince?" Another pause, longer this time. The question was too heavy. Silence filled the room. "Titles," the tutor said carefully, "are heavy things." Aurelian nodded, though he did not understand. Not yet. The crown prince, Edric, was everything but Aurelian, was everything everyone wanted the crown prince to be. Loud, certain, respectful, patient, courageous, and loved. Edric was a year older, broader in the shoulders, quicker to laugh and quicker to anger. He wore the future like armor, convinced it would protect him. Aurelian was told never to leave his chambers, but to always seek for help if he needed anything. Aurelian loves reading and writing, but that faithful day everyone was asleep, and he was bored and wanted to read something. He quickly stood up to the old library. On the hallway to the entrance was where the two boys met. Inevitably, unavoidably, it was not hatred that passed between them, but confusion. "You live here?" Edric asked rudely, pointing his sword at Aurelian's face. "He reeks of alcohol and couldn't even stand properly." "Yes." "Why?" Aurelian shrugged. Why do you? Edric frowned, unused to not knowing. But curiosity won. Immediately, the palace was bridged by a palace thief who came to steal and harm the prince. Aurelian was so skilled, the prince was shocked that such a fine swordman was in the palace. He defeated the place thief with the prince's sword and quickly maneuvered his way past the palace guards back to his chambers, and the guards didn't know who he was. "My prince," said the palace guard as they rushed to him while he was lying on the floor. Edric was so impressed that he quietly seeks to know who the mystery person living in the palace was and carefully studied him. They began to meet in secret. Books became bridges. Story was a way to bond. Silence became companionship. And for a time, Aurelian believed that perhaps he had been wrong, that maybe he did belong after all. One crisp autumn morning, the two rode out together for a hunting trip, a rare escape from council chambers for the crown prince and suffocating etiquette, but a fresh hope for Aurelian. "You're scaring the deer," Edric muttered, adjusting the feather on his arrow. "I'm not scaring the deer," Aurelian replied. "I'm scaring you. The deer are just witnesses." Edric snorted. "Try not to fall off your horse." "You waved at a squirrel and lost balance," Edric said sarcastically. They rode deeper into the forest, past the stone markers that meant Valadorn ends here. Aurelian noticed first. "We crossed the border." Edric shrugged. "Trees don't care about politics. Border guards do. Good thing we didn't bring any." Before Aurelian could reply, an arrow sliced through the air and landed in the tree between them with a solid thunk. Both froze. A voice rang out from the underbrush. "You ride like nobles, you talk like idiots, and you trespass like amateurs." A figure stepped into the clearing, slim, sharp-eyed, dressed in hunter's leathers the color of storm clouds. A bow rested casually in her hand, another arrow already nocked. Edric straightened in the saddle. "We are princes of Valadorn." "Unfortunate for Valadorn," she said dryly. Aurelian grinned. "Finally, someone honest." She studied them, then gave a short bow, more mockery than respect. "I am Prince Kael of Thornmere." Edric blinked. "Prince?" Aurelian didn't. He just tilted his head. "You're not what our tutors described." Kael smirked. "Let me guess. You were told Thornmere's air was dangerous and unpredictable. But you're shocked to find out that I'm a lady." "Yes," Edric admitted. "Good. Accurate education?" She walked closer, gaze sharp. "You crossed into my kingdom's forest. That means you owe me a challenge." Edric brightened. "A duel?" Kael rolled her eyes. "Please, you look like you duel with wine." Aurelian laughed. "He does." Kyle pointed deeper into the woods. "There's a white stag that roams these parts. Fast, clever, never caught. First one to track it earns safe passage home." "And if we lose?" Edric asked. Kael smiled, all teeth, no warmth. "Then I keep your horses, and maybe your boots. I like the boots." The hunt was nothing like Edric expected. Kael moved through the forest like she belonged to it. No snapping twigs, no wasted motion. Aurelian surprisingly kept up. Years of wandering palace back halls had made him quieter than he looked. Edric, meanwhile, stepped on everything that could be stepped on. At one point, Kael hissed, "Stop breathing so loudly." "I'm not. Your lungs sound aristocratic." Hours passed. The forest thickened, and then they saw it. The white stag stood in a shaft of golden light, antlers like branching silver, eyes bright and watchful. Edric slowly lifted his bow. Aurelian put a hand on his arm. "Wait," Kyle noticed. "What?" Aurelian lowered his voice. "Look at it. It's not just an animal. It's old, important." Kyle studied the stag. Then, quietly, she lowered her bow too. Edric looked between them. "We came to win," Aurelian shrugged. Maybe winning isn't always killing the rarest thing you can find. Kyle gave him a long look, measuring, reconsidering. The stag flicked its ears and vanished into the trees like a ghost. Silence settled. Well, Edric said weakly, I suppose we all lost. Kyle shook her head. No. She slung her bow over her shoulder. You passed. Passed what? Edric asked. The test to see if you were worth negotiating with instead of fighting. Aurelian grinned. So we keep our boots? For now, she said, stepping closer, offering her hand first to Aurelian, then to Edric. Borders don't have to mean enemies, Cale said. Next time you cross into Thornmere... Edric winced. With permission? Cale smirked. Try to. But bring wine. The good kind. As they rode back toward Valadorn at sunset, Edric nudged his brother. She liked you more. Aurelian smirked. Everyone does. I'm less crown-shaped. Edric laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. As they ride back home, Cale found a book written Aurelian with fancy fonts on the first page. She thought of ways to get it back to him. Are you sure it's all about the book? Her friend said, smiling. She smirked back, not answering her. Deep in thought, she rides across the border into Valdorn, looking for Aurelian to give it back to him. The truth came, as truths often do, from someone with nothing left to lose. Old Mara, the queen's former handmaiden, had been dismissed quietly after too many years and too many memories. Before she left, she pressed a cold hand into Aurelian's. You must listen, she whispered, even when no one speaks. Then she told him about the council's fear, about the prophecy no one would repeat aloud, about the king's decision. There were those, Mara said, who believed you would undo the kingdom. Aurelian felt the world tilt. But I've done nothing, he said. She smiled sadly. That never matters. As she walks out of his chambers, knowing what he was supposed to become, or destroy, Aurelian made a choice. He would be good, not loudly, not gloriously, quietly. He helped servants without being seen. He read laws and histories not to rule, but to understand. When disputes broke out among the palace staff, he listened instead of commanded. People began to notice, not his name, but his presence. He has the king's eyes, they whispered, and the queen's heart. That, perhaps, was his greatest crime. He wanders off to the King's Road. The King's Road through Valadorn was not a place for accidents. It was wide enough for 10 riders abreast, lined with silver-barked trees planted by kings long dead, and watched, always watched by patrols who pretended not to watch at all, which was why Aurelian knew immediately that the hooded rider ahead of him did not belong. She sat too easily in the saddle, not stiff like a merchant, not relaxed like a farmer, alert, balanced, ready. Aurelian slowed his horse. You're a long way from any village, he called lightly. The rider didn't turn. So are you. The voice made him smile. That's a familiar tone for a stranger on our most guarded road. Is it guarded? She asked. I must have missed the welcome parade. Aurelian rode closer until he was alongside her. She finally looked at him and the hood slipped just enough. Sharp eyes, storm cloud leathers hidden under a travel cloak. Prince Cale, he said quietly. Prince who never was, she replied. He laughed under his breath but was shocked to know she already knew who he was before him. Thornmere is miles ahead, he said to himself. You can't just ride into Valadorn alone. I can, she said. I just did. That's not the same thing as safely. Kyle scanned the trees. Your guards are terrible at hiding. They'd be offended, Aurelian said, if they weren't pretending to be trees. They rode side by side at an easy pace, like old conspirators instead of heirs of neighboring kingdoms who were technically still in a very polite Cold War. "You shouldn't be here," he said after a moment, softer now. "I know. If my father finds out, he'll do what? Send a strongly worded letter?" Aurelian hesitated. "He doesn't bluff." Cale studied his face. "You're not afraid for yourself." "No," he admitted. "I'm afraid for you." That, finally, made her look away. What neither of them noticed was the second rider further down the road, half hidden behind a bend where the trees curved inward. King Aldrin of Valadorn had not meant to be on the road that morning. A restless night had driven him from the palace before dawn, riding alone except for one shadowing guard, far enough back to grant the illusion of solitude. He had been thinking about treaties, about borders, about the delicate problem of Thornmere. He had not expected to see his forgotten son riding beside Thornmere's heir like they shared a secret. The king slowed his horse and guided it off the road into the trees, silent as age and experience had taught him to be. From the cover of branches he watched. He saw the way Aurelian leaned slightly toward Kyle when she spoke. Not flirtation, but attention. Respect. He saw Kyle laugh at something Aurelian said, quick and unguarded, before remembering herself and scanning the woods again. He saw something more dangerous than romance. Trust. King Aldrin's jaw tightened, not because he disapproved, but because he understood exactly what it meant. The prophecies are already taking shape. Back on the road, Kyle pulled her hood lower. "I can't go much farther. You're barely inside the border." "I didn't come for sightseeing." Aurelian met her eyes. "Then why?" She hesitated, which told him the truth mattered. "I came to return your book to you and also warn you that my father has hawks in his court who want war," she said quietly. "They think Valadorn is weak, distracted." Aurelian snorted softly. "They're not wrong about distracted." "I needed to see for myself," she continued, "to know if there was another path." "And?" he asked. Cale looked at him steadily. "There might be." The weight of that sat between them. Footsteps rustled in the distant brush, one of the king's patrols shifting position. Cale heard it too. "I should go." Aurelian nodded but didn't move. "Next time, send word." "Where's the fun in that?" She turned her horse toward the trees, then paused. "You're not the prince they should have overlooked," she said. "That may become a problem for everyone." Then she vanished into the forest. From the shadows, King Aldrin remained still long after she was gone. His gaze rested on Aurelian, alone now on the wide white road, looking toward the trees like part of him had followed her. "The wrong son," the king murmured to himself, not with regret, with realization. That winter, Edric fell ill. The palace changed. Physicians ran through corridors. Priests burned incense thick enough to choke the air. The king paced like a man aging years by the hour. Aurelian sat by Edric's bed. "I'm afraid," Edric confessed, voice thin as paper. Aurelian said nothing. He simply stayed. When Edric recovered, barely, the council noticed something they could no longer ignore. The spare was no longer invisible. Power does not like uncertainty. The king was stalked with the words from Cale. Whispers returned. The prophecies were already playing, and the child was working with our enemies, the king allies said in court. These meetings were held behind doors. Aurelian was never invited to knock upon. By spring, the king's health faltered. By summer, the council had decided. Aurelian was summoned at dawn. "You will leave the capital at once," King Aldrin said, not unkindly, not kindly either. "A diplomatic post, safe, honorable." "Exile," Aurelian replied. King Aldrin did not argue. I never wanted the crown, nor was I fighting against it. I love my brother, and I will do everything in my power to support him, Aurelian said quietly. That, the king answered, is exactly why they fear you. The decision has been made, the king said, turning his gaze from him in a manner that shows that final. That night, Aurelian walked the city alone. He watched lanterns flicker. He listened to laughter spill from taverns. He memorized the sound of a kingdom that would never know his name. At the eastern gate, Edric met him. I should have fought, Edric said. Aurelian smiled. You did, in your own way. They embraced. Before dawn, Aurelian rode out. As Edric watched, that ends his Valadron story. He would never step foot in Valadron again, or would tales be ever told of him in Valadron. They did not send Aurelian away in chains. That would have been honest. Instead, they sent him with polite words, a purse of gold, and a royal decree that called it exile. Valadorn was preparing for war. Factions in court whispered that rival kingdoms would exploit succession uncertainty. And Aurelian, overlooked, quietly beloved by soldiers and servants alike, was uncertainty made flesh. So he left before dawn, without ceremony. No escort, no banner. Just a prince who the crown fit but would never wear it, riding away from the kingdom that had decided he was too complicated to keep. He did not look back. 3 days into the King's Road south, the wind changed. Smoke carries differently when it comes from hearth fires versus burning fields. Aurelian knew the difference. He reined in on a rise overlooking the valley that cradled Greythorn Keep, the fortress that guarded the pass between Valdorn and Thornmere. Black banners ringed it like a tightening fist. Siege towers crawled forward. Trebuchets hurled stones that shattered against ancient walls. The fields below were trampled into mud and ash. Varkesh, not Thornmere, not Valadorn's expected enemy. A third kingdom striking while both sides watched each other. Aurelian exhaled slowly. Of course, he murmured. While we argued, someone else brought a knife. He could have turned his horse then. He was no longer a prince of Valadorn in any official sense. No duty bound him. No order compelled him. The road south was still open. Instead, he turned toward the smoke. By the time he reached the outer farms, refugees were already fleeing, Valadorn villagers, Thornmere traders, no longer caring whose side of the border they'd been born on. Aurelian dismounted to help an old man whose cart had broken a wheel. Which way is safe? The man asked, panic trembling through him. South, Aurelian said, lifting the cart while a boy shoved a rock beneath the axle. Stay off the main road. You a soldier? The man asked. Aurelian hesitated, then gave a crooked half-smile. Something like that. He sent them on their way and kept riding toward the keep. Inside Greythorn, the situation was worse than he'd feared. The garrison was a patchwork, the border soldiers of Valdorn and Thornmere forced into sudden alliance, short on supplies, shorter on leadership. Several officers had already fallen. Aurelian entered through a side postern as wounded were being carried out. A Thornmere guard crossed his spear. State your Aurelian, he said, formerly of Valdorn, currently of Bad Timing. The guard stared. Recognition flickered. Word had traveled, even across borders. You're the exiled one. So I've been told. Another crash shook the wall. Dust rained from the archway. The guard looked toward the battlements, then back at Aurelian. Can you fight? Aurelian took the spear from his hands. Yes. He did not announce himself, did not claim command. He simply stepped where the line was weakest and held. He has read about various conquers of great men and how they did it. Now was his time to make his presence felt. He dragged stones to reinforce a cracked parapet. organized bucket lines when fire arrows struck, took messages between Valdorn and Thornmere captains who, hours ago, would not have shared a table. Men and women followed him without asking who had given him authority. He never said he'd once been a prince. It didn't matter here. The name the Exiled One was used to address him. By dusk, the outer gate was failing. "Fall back to the inner bridge," someone shouted. The narrow stone bridge to the inner keep became the last defense. If it fell, the fortress fell. If the fortress fell, the pass opened. Aurelian found himself there with a handful of soldiers from both kingdoms, shields locked, backs to the keep. He quickly stepped in with the 4 leaders of the camp and saw great multitudes of the enemy soldiers fall. They kept fighting till it was night but couldn't break their barrier. As the enemy retreats, hope entered the soldiers and they thought it was all over, not knowing that was the enemy's plan. A troop of soldiers were spotted coming from afar. "Hold," he said, voice raw from smoke. "Reinforcements will come." "How do you know?" a Valadorn archer gasped. "I don't," Aurelian said, "but we hold anyway." The enemy charged. The first clash rattled his bones. The second numbed his arms. By the third, he was too tired to feel fear. He fought like a man who had already lost everything that could be taken from him. A Varkesh soldier broke through, blade raised toward a fallen Thornmere girl, barely old enough to carry a sword. Aurelian moved without thought. Steel slid between his ribs, meant for her. He staggered but did not fall. He drove his own blade forward, dropping the attacker, then turned back to the line. "Hold," he shouted, blood darkening his side. "Just a little longer." As if the world had been waiting for that promise, horns sounded from the valley. Valadorn's cavalry, Thornmere riders beside them. The relief force crashed into Varkesh's rear lines, and the siege began to break. Only then did Aurelian's knees give way. They laid him on the stones of the bridge he had not let them cross. A Thornmere captain knelt beside him, hands shaking. "Stay with us. Healers are coming." Aurelian managed a faint smile. "Tell them not to rush on my account." "You saved the keep," the captain said. "You saved both kingdoms." He coughed, breath hitching. "Funny. They exiled me so I wouldn't be a complication." His gaze drifted toward the open gate where Valdorn and Thornmere banners now flew side by side over a battlefield. Neither had meant to share. "Guess I finally belonged nowhere," he whispered, "so I stood in the middle." His eyes closed as the horns of victory echoed through the pass. They buried him on the hill overlooking Greythorn, not as a crowned prince, not even as an official one, just a stone with a name, placed by soldiers from 2 kingdoms who agreed on little, except this. Years later, King Edric I ruled wisely. Sometimes, when decisions weighed heavily, he dismissed the court and sat alone. And in those moments he asked himself a question no one else ever heard. What would my brother have done? Statues crumble, names fade, but somewhere, in a village that still tells a story of a kind stranger who stood his ground, a prince is remembered, not as a king, but as something rarer. Aurelian of Valadorn, the prince who never was, who stood anyway. And long after treaties were signed and borders redrawn, travelers on the King's Road would point to that hill and tell the story of the exiled one who, with no throne to defend and no crown to claim, chose to defend everyone.